It's really nice to see everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Jacqueline. I'm a member of the Ocean Now team, and I'm your host today, alongside with Maike, who will be your co-host. Our event today is part of our program Inseparable on our relationship with the ocean and nature, which will be running until 6th of May. Today we have a very special guest whose approach perfectly fits our event topic, and I'm really glad we have you on board, Daniel.
Thanks for inviting me.
So Daniel is one of the thought leaders on the topic of regenerative cultures, which will also be our topic for today. So thank you very much, Daniel, for taking the time. We know that you're really busy at the moment, as now your topic is more important than ever in this crisis. So thank you very much. We really appreciate that.
Pleasure.
Before we start with the topic, I just want to draw your attention to some technical and organizational things. So first of all, I'm your host and Maike is your co-host. This event will be in English and we're live streaming this event on Facebook. You're muted all by default, and we kindly ask you to stay muted so we don't have any background noise. However, it would be really nice if you're on your camera, if you feel comfortable with it, because it just makes it feel a lot more personal. If you have any questions during the meeting, you can send a message directly to Maike with the chat function. So how it works that in the Zoom menu, like below, you see a chat icon. And when you click on it, a chat on the right opens with a blue drop-down menu. And in that menu, you can send your questions directly to Maike.
Quick note, sorry to interrupt, because my name is Ocean Now here. You can send it to Ocean Now.
Yes. So we will group your question and answer those in the Q&A session. Our agenda for today, first I'll give a little introduction to Daniel, and then we start with the topic of regenerative cultures for about 30 minutes. And at the end, we have a 15-minute Q&A session. Yeah, so let's start. Daniel, where are you dialing in from?
Mallorca, Palma de Mallorca.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, how's the situation there?
Well, they just allowed children to go out for 1 day, for 1 hour every day, but with only one parent and only 1,000 meters away from home. So they like to keep the regulations very strict and detailed. And we've just been in lockdown for over 40 days, not being allowed into the street. But hey, starting to look up.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. So just a quick introduction. As we know, you live in Mallorca at the moment, but you grew up in Munich, so in Germany. You are a marine biologist and a scuba diving instructor before you decided to focus on sustainability and sustainable communities in 1998. Originally, you were trained as a biologist and zoologist at the University of Edinburgh and the University of California. You hold a Master of Science in Holistic Science and a PhD in Natural Design, and you were also highly involved with Gaia Education, and you're also author of the book Designing Regenerative Cultures. This one here. Yeah. So we saw your talk on the Pioneers of Change online summit, and we found it is very inspiring, and in you we see an alternative way of thinking and living in our society, and we're just very happy if you could share your wisdom with us today. So let's make a start. What does the term regenerative cultures actually mean? And I know many of us already know the term sustainable, so what is actually the difference between regenerative and sustainable?
Well, it always depends on how you interpret both of those terms, but in general, like life is a regenerative community. Life is not about individuals, it's about a planetary process of life creating conditions conducive to life. And we all, as individuals, as a species, as communities and cultures, have to fit into that tension between supporting the self and supporting the wider context. And being regenerative is understanding that the only way that you can really serve yourself in an enlightened way is to serve a larger whole, because you're not separate from it, you're fundamentally dependent upon it. And we're seeing this right now with the pandemic that is ultimately caused by the amount of environmental breakdown we've caused over hundreds of years has now caused the ability for these viruses to jump into humans. It happens much faster because of the degraded ecosystem. And so it's giving us a window of how centuries of degenerating ecosystems and planetary health is now beginning to feed back strongly on, and has done for a very long time, on human health. And so being regenerative as a culture is to meet the needs of the culture in ways that actually enhance life as a whole. That so it would be about increasing forest cover, increasing the fertility of the soil and the depth of the soil, about healing the rivers, healing the oceans, changing our current cultural impact from degenerative, destructive, and exploitative, which is what we predominantly are doing as human beings, to regenerative and healing. And that's the U-turn I think we need to take as a species quickly.
Yes, definitely. And I think like regenerative is just like a step further than sustainable, right?
Well, one thing that is kind of important, that in the last few years, 3, 4, 5 years, the term regenerative, particularly in the English word and in the German world a little slower, has become a lot more popular. And whenever a term becomes popular, then the kind of usual consultancy types jump in and make that word the new in term, and they distinguish it against the out term, which in this case is sustainability. And I really want to make a clear point that sustainability is still a goal. We haven't reached that bridge of sustainability yet. There's nothing wrong with working towards sustainability. And there are even some people that use that term and do so in a regenerative way. But in my opinion, and I'm leaning on the work of many people here, Carol Sanford, Bill Reed, Ben Haggard, Regenesis Group, there's a spectrum that goes from business as usual to doing a little less harm, which is green, to sustainable, which is not adding any more damage to the system, but because what we've created over the last 250 or even 5,000 years is a system where we've put so much damage into the system that if we don't restore and regenerate, then that's not enough. And so the jump from sustainable to restorative sometimes can still be in the mindset of being very engineering and quick fix solution minded. And then you end up with still regenerative solutions, but that are not attuned to that place and that culture. And being regenerative is really understanding that we are part of nature. And as nature, we have the capability to do what nature does actually do best, which is create conditions conducive to life, to build ways of serving ourselves that serve the health and wholeness and vitality of the system as a whole, whether it's our community, our ecosystem, our bioregion, or the entire planet.
Yeah. You just mentioned also healing the oceans, yeah, as part of regenerative cultures. So how does regenerative cultures relate to the ocean? Can you maybe give us like 2 or 3 concrete examples?
Well, the oceans are key. In many ways, we're all oceans walking land. Like the salt in your tears is the same salinity as the ocean. So we come from the ocean, life comes from the ocean. The ocean has buffered global climate throughout the Holocene and created this stability where our civilization could emerge and this current abundance has emerged. And so the ocean has also been the buffer that has stopped us from seeing the effects of climate change over the last 50 years in a more drastic way. But it's also in many ways the most endangered part of the system. It cannot take any more abuse. And if we let ocean acidification go on, then, and also the ocean warming that is taking place is really concerning, because once that buffer goes, we're talking about shifting climates over climate patterns over thousands of years, like many human generations, to points where it could be hard to even maintain what we would call civilization, or even the survival of our species. So healing the oceans is critical, and there's lots going on in that field. Like there are a lot of marine protected areas around the world now, but they need to be reinforced better. And there's also I run this little interview series called the Regeneration Rising, and you find it on YouTube just looking for my name. And I interview a guy called Tom Goro a few weeks back, maybe 6-8 weeks back. And Tom has created all over the world projects where, using microelectricity, he's able to increase the regrowth, the regeneration period of coral reefs in such a way that he can speed up the natural process in which coral reefs can regenerate. And he's also demonstrated that same technique, and we're talking like microcurrents, nothing dangerous as such, can also help with regrowing Posidonia or seagrass meadows. And both corals and seagrass meadows are ways of beginning a process of carbon sequestration from the ocean into both biological and then geological material that is vital in responding to climate change. So there's some amazing ocean regeneration projects all over the world. Here in Balearics, where I live, Save the Med, Fundación Maríes, the Instituto Oceanográfico, there are lots of different players that have come together in the last few years to really take the preservation of the Mediterranean much more seriously. And the amount of MPAs is increasing, marine protected areas. But there's still a lot of work to be done. But another example would be that I'm in conversation with the people of what is now called the Ocean Race, and previous it was the Volvo Ocean Race, and previous to that was the Whitbread Around the World, the famous sailing race. And they've already in the last edition done a lot of the waking people up to the plastics issue and ocean plastics before everybody else was doing it. And now they're really seriously talking about using the event where these sailors sail around the world's oceans to really highlight the critical issue around ocean health, and use each camp and all their media reach to really put the message central that if humanity wants to survive, we need to take care of the oceans. The oceans have taken care of life for the history of life on Earth, and now it's time for us to take care of the oceans.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really good to hear like those concrete examples that are already going on. It's thank you very much. So you already mentioned the topic of the separation between human and nature. And we know that this also the topic of regenerative cultures is a very philosophical topic. So I would like to read a Goethe quote from one of your articles, and you also used it in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Nature. We are surrounded and embraced by her, powerless to separate ourselves from her, and powerless to penetrate beyond her. We live in her midst and know her not. She is incessantly speaking to us, but betrays not her secret. We constantly act up on her, and yet have no power over her. She has always thought and always thinks, though not as a man, but as nature. That which is most unnatural is still nature. The stupidest Philistinism has a touch of her genius. Whoso cannot see her everywhere, sees her nowhere rightly. So I just think this is such a beautiful quote. Yeah. And it shows that the topic of separation was already there over 200 years ago when Goethe was alive.
Good.
So yet,
sorry, go on.
Yet today we feel we are more separated from nature than ever. So what do you think? How did it actually happen that this separation increased over hundreds of years?
Yeah, it's fascinating that that piece that you just read, and thank you for reading it. I love that quote. Is T.H. Huxley,
Yeah.
the famous geologist who was a supporter of Darwin's theory and basically was one of the top scientists in the world when the journal Nature was first published. He used that quote in his. If you look up first edition Nature, the Nature journal, that quote starts the whole story. And T.H. Huxley says that the understanding of the poet scientist about what nature is will probably endure over all the sort of philosophizing that will be written in these journals. And this was almost like 150 some years ago. And for me, what Goethe saw coming was that in the power of the analytical mind separating itself from what it is observing, we were beginning to believe that, which is really just a cognitive trick. It's almost a mirage of consciousness that we have this sense that we are separate from what we're observing and that we are not participants in it, and that our mind doesn't, to a large extent, also co-create how we perceive the world and what we perceive and the structures we build. And so Goethe really understood the active component of mind, which in the Western science world, we've only really come back to through the work of Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, or they were inspired by Gregory Bateson. So Bateson was one of the first to bring that issue back into our scientific discourse. But it's really at the heart of, as long as we believe that culture and nature are somehow separate, and what I find so interesting in this Goethe quote is that he actually goes a step further. He says that if you don't see nature everywhere, you don't see her anywhere in the right light. And if you take that into a sort of meditation, then you have to challenge yourself with the difficulty of looking at an atomic power plant or a nuclear bomb or a fighter jet and ultimately say that's nature, as jarring as it might sound. Because the minute you make it separate, even technology, it becomes an other, and you continue this dualism. But if you understand that all the molecules, everything in that object is part of the geophysical cycle of Gaia, of a living planet transforming constantly and creating conditions conducive to life, then suddenly these technologies, just as in life, evolution takes dead ends. And they might last 100 or 200 or 1,000 or 2,000 years or longer, but they're dead ends. They're not going anywhere. And what we have to realize is that this civilization we've built is, at this very point in time, not fit for purpose anymore. We're behaving out of sync with the life-sustaining patterns that we critically depend upon. And so the only way to bring us back into sync is to redesign our entire human presence on Earth and our impact on Earth. And the biggest upstream shift that we need to make before we can find ways how to do this is by understanding that we actually were never separate from nature. And that's what Goethe was pointing at. Before him, William Blake said, may God us keep from single vision and Newton's sleep. And he was speaking to exactly the same thing, to Newton's like over focusing on mind and analytical analysis and quantitative science over all the other ways of gaining participatory knowledge of how to be in right relationships with a living Earth.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole key. Yeah, that we're not separate. Mm-hmm. And we know that, like, if we talk about we as humans, we always talk about like the industrialized countries, but we know that there are also humans or cultures that do not see themselves as separate, from nature. So what is actually the alternative to the nature-culture dualism?
Well, I mean, you already pointed at it. For the longest period of our species history, we lived as bioregional species, embedded in our communities, in the limits of our ecosystems, the bioregions we moved in as hunter-gatherers. And in the original participation mystique of indigenous meaning making, everything is full of meaning. The dewdrop being hit by sunlight and creating a little diamond on the leaf is a communication that gives direct insight of what to do next and what's going on. And then the power of science that separated us from this original participation mystique also brought us a lot of positive things. What we now call to do is to somehow put the two together and value them equally. There's a danger of this framing of paradigm shift, like even the kind of from eco to ego, from ego to eco. It again traps us in this leaving the self behind and moving only into the total, we're all one. And in order to do this in our daily life constantly and sensibly and wisely, we actually need to bring the two together and say, the only way I can express myself meaningfully is in relationship to the larger context. And yes, I need to, in order to serve the whole, I also need to serve myself, but it doesn't become the kind of, I'm going to serve myself to just get richer and more famous or whatever. It's about, I have a service to the larger whole in terms of improving its health and wholeness that then also feeds back on me, and therefore it's the wisest thing to do. And yeah, so for me it's really important that we watch out to not right now, where everybody is ready to leave the old behind, we need to exactly at that point find the synthesis. Like, there's value in science. I don't want to be devil reductionist science. I don't want to be devil technology, but I want us to bring in the wisdom that indigenous people have held and have stewarded over millennia of oppression and ill treatment. And now coming to find a synthesis of, as one species, coming together and saying, how can we live in right relationships with each other and with this planet? And I see the conversation is starting everywhere, in different forms and with different languages, and then people trying to bring it all together in one language. And I think it's actually the diversity that is, like as in life, is actually where the juice and the hope lies, that we're beginning to grapple with this issue.
Yeah, so yeah, very, very inspiring. So if I understand correctly, like living in a participatory way goes hand in hand with changing the narrative we live by. So what does that mean, and how do we actually get there?
It's in many ways, you get all the kind of Enlightenment teachers saying this is it, or we're already there. To some extent, it is so much about understanding. Like, the minute you understand that, like my friend Jared Mitchley, professor for system science at the University of Hull, has this wonderful sentence that he just says, everything is an intervention. If you unpack that for a second, you realize that what you think, what you say, what you do, and what you don't think, and what you don't say, and what you don't do, has agency in the universe. And the minute we all take responsibility for co-creating in that way and relating in that way, the bizarre thing happens that at one and the same time, we're incredibly asked to be incredibly humble, to understand that we don't really know how to participate appropriately, and yet we affect everything. And at the same time, we're incredibly empowered. We realize, wait a minute, I can change the world by this conversation, maybe just a little bit, but who knows? And that's what I feel is that's also another term of dualism. It's not theoretical. That is another trap, to make it like, here's a theory person and here's a practice person. there's nothing more theoretical than good practice and nothing more practical than a good theory. That's the two quotes that I started my PhD with. And what I'm trying to say by that is that as we create new narratives and live into them, as we don't jump for solutions, like one of the things that you see running through my book is this issue that at the beginning of the book, I realized I can't offer solutions because I know that yesterday's solutions turn into tomorrow's problems or into today's problems. And so how can I be so arrogant to pretend that what I can offer would in any way be a solution and not cause a problem down the line, because the whole thing keeps transforming and changing. But what I can offer are questions, and those questions are about relationship and right connection. And so that's why in the book there are 250 questions rather than lots of sort of marching orders of how to create regenerative cultures, because that, maybe I should say this explicitly, that's why there's a plural in the title, because I believe that these cultures can only emerge out of the human relationships in place and the relationship with place and the healing of the relationship between nature and culture and people and place. It's about re-inhabiting, re-indigenizing, coming back home. And that has to happen. You have to make it happen in your community. I have to make it happen in my community. We have to make it happen everywhere. But it will be different in each place because it will be sourced out of the uniqueness of that place and that culture. And so, and you wanted concrete examples. Just again, people have to do a little bit of web searching, but if you search regenerative projects together with the Buckminster Fuller Institute, there will be a page that pops up that takes you to a Google map that has the planet and hundreds of mature regeneration projects. That mature in this case for us when we built the map, and David McConnell mainly built it, was a good website and a short video telling the story. So it's not, there are many thousands more than are on that map, but the mature ones are collected there. And then if you look at the Spring Prize, Lush, the cosmetics company, has got a prize for ecological and social regeneration. If you Google springprize.org, you'll see a map with projects all over the world that I had the pleasure of judging as part of the judging panel on that award. And they're amazing. And they're like, right now when people are at home and they're, rather than binge watching another stupid kind of series, binge watch on being inspired by regenerative projects around the world, because you won't believe how much this is already happening. Like the regeneration is rising. It's already like it'll just take time to get over the radar screen.
Yeah, it's really good to hear that there's like so many of those projects, and it's really good to hear that this is not only theory. Yeah, that this is becoming actually into practice. So yeah, one topic for us would also be like one thing you said was that before we actually change our systems, yeah, we need to change the way we think. I mean, that was the narrative we just talked about. But to change systems, we actually need political power. Mm-hmm. And at Ocean now, we actually see this just right now. We're facing the challenge of a political narrative that is in contrast with our mission. Mm-hmm. So what would be your advice for us in this situation?
Thank you for bringing politics in, because it's something that I'm increasingly more aware that it is actually like one of my big mentors. Like I've had a number of really influential people that I learned from, but David Orr, who coined the term eco-literacy, is probably America's most well-known environmental educator. He just published a book last month called Democracy Unchained. And it's an edited compendium where lots of people put essays towards. And it really makes that point to very much in an American context that the biggest mistake our movement for social and environmental justice and a better world and all that has made over the last 50 years is that we didn't really take politics serious. It it was sort of considered that's selling out, that's going into that world. And meanwhile, particularly in America, the real democratic structures have been eroded. And now that people are waking up to it, they're seeing that the whole system is rigged. And so I think politics is becoming increasingly important, and the old problem of polarizing through politics, we really need to somehow also overcome. So there's a kind of distinction between party politics and working on policy with public authority and government. And I think that that latter is really important. The party politics bit is tricky because we really don't have time. We're all in one boat. And I sense that the dominoes that are now in motion, started by COVID-19, will actually create a whole new playing field where we're already seeing it happening. The big lobby power of the fossil fuel industry is suddenly deflated because the fossil fuel industry is in such a mess now because of the pandemic. And so similarly, I mean, Lufthansa is getting possibly private, nationalized, and big. I mean, all of this was unthinkable only 6 weeks ago. So I sense that now more than ever, we actually need the conversation about what kind of political system and what restructuring of the political landscape do we need to enable communities in place, in region, to create the more resilient, more local ecosystem healing structures and production processes that are relocalized, that are attuned to the conditions of place. And that means taking the political ideal of subsidiarity that is written into the EU constitution, but making it real. Enabling communities and regions to take the decisions that they really matter to them, enabling them to build the structures that they need so that people have something to eat and clean water and clean energy from renewables and all of that. And through by decentralizing this and bringing it back to the local and the regional scale, we create, learning from life's patterns, a much more resilient and much more responsive system that can weather the 3 or 4 stormy decades ahead that we now have. So I think politics is really important, but it's also about going into politics to transform the entire playing field.
Yeah, it's also much about actually a dialogue, right? And maybe to get like from political level to individual level again. I think you just mentioned some examples, but what can each of us do to live in a more regenerative way and also to overcome the nature-culture dualism?
Well, let me just briefly get back to the politics a bit, because one thing that we have this habit of, and it's stirred up by social media, that we all need to sort of tribalize and feel some sort of identity of where we feel we belong. And often that's generated by othering some other group that has a different opinion. And so the minute you hear certain memes, you immediately like put somebody in a box, stop listening, talking to them, and you just see them, they're one of those. And what I found, like, for example, I'm not happy with every detail of the new Green Deal that they're currently talking about in Europe. And all those, the same all over the world, this kind of the big money trying to suddenly get onto the sustainability agenda, but rigging it their way. I see the danger of that co-option, but I also get really annoyed by movements like the wrong kind of green and that immediately counter. So it's what I feel, and that this comes to the answer of your question, what can we all do, is to keep the dialogue open, to live the questions together, to speak up for what we believe. I think if we don't, others will make us like, you must create a system or be enslaved by another man's, also William Blake, 250 years ago. We have to actively, and this is also bringing it back to participation. It's about getting off our asses and doing something. The time to just sit there and zap and watch the actors on stage is over. Either we all make ourselves actors now, or we're just pawns in somebody else's play. And so what can we all do? start these conversations with our community in our way, not in my way, not reading my book. The questions are useful. The rest, I'm probably, it's a limited perspective, like every other perspective is. But if we engage with others and saying, how can we live in a way that serves us, our community, our loved ones, but also serves the whole of humanity and all of life? It's not that idealistic a question. It's a survival question. It's the most sensible question to ask. But we need to ask it, and we need to do it in community.
Yeah. Why are we worth surviving? Yeah. That's the question. Yeah. Thank you very much. We're nearly at the end of the interview, and we always want to close the session with a positive question. So this question would be, have you experienced people in your life who changed their life around towards a more regenerative way, and how did that work?
You're asking me the question, and right next to you is Bradley Robertson. We can't see him because he's hiding, but he's a good friend of mine. And we've had conversation over the last 10 years. He used to be a scuba diving instructor from Australia. And I've watched him say, I don't want to just teach people how to dive. And he started first an association because he's passionate about sharks, monitoring the ray population around here. And he's single-handedly, or with his wife and then with his team and now with many supporters, has built up Save the Med. And so he is a perfect example of how he's turned his way of meeting his family's needs into being of service to this entire community and to the Mediterranean, and to start conversations about plastics that have now reached the hotels here on Mallorca, and to take kids on beach cleanups, and to have the leadership to bring in regenerative as a meme into their strategy, to not just talk, because the danger at the moment is that everybody's talking about ocean conservation and ocean preservation. But the only way that you can sort out the ocean is sorting out what we are doing on land, as well as what we're doing to the oceans. So this whole thing is fundamentally interconnected, and that's, yeah. So, but that is just one example. There's so many people around us that have understood that working just for money isn't fulfilling. That we all would like to earn in two currency, money and meaning. If you only have meaning, I've lived there for a long time, it gets a bit anxiety producing. You also need a bit of money. But if you only have money, it doesn't matter how much, it becomes really empty. And so I watch people in all walks of life, from people who haven't had a lot to people who've been extremely successful and made a lot of money, to redirect their efforts and say, no, I'm called. I want to make my little part of this transition happen. And I see it everywhere. So, of course, I'm in my own bubble chamber. I recognize that. But that bubble chamber is currently expanding at a wonderful speed. So let's hope it's in time.
Yeah, it's good to hear like some of your bubble insights. So yeah, it's all about like the question: what kind of person do you want to be? Yeah, do you want to be a mean person, or do you want to be a person that supports life?
Yeah, and ultimately, I think it is about the journey and how your commitment to it. If you do it only because, well, that sounds like that guy's sounds all very nice, but that guy's a real idealist and he hasn't really got ground contact to what's going on in the world. Well, we all choose to put our life's energy, our spirit, our breath into something or other. Well, if you align it with life as a planetary process creating conditions conducive to life, and if that gives you meaning, it doesn't actually matter whether you succeed with everything. It's about an attitude. And okay, I don't think we should be in this to give ourselves or humanity eternal life. And we should be in it because we feel that it is living in right relationship, that it is the appropriate thing to do right now, and come home to a state of being regeneratively in order to repattern the future so it may be regenerative. It's not all about doing, it's about a beingness state change.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Okay.
That was just really inspiring, and also a very visionary, but also very practical kind of learning. We also see that now, in this moment of crisis, is actually the ultimate moment of opportunity. Yeah, so this is also why your topic is now more important than ever. And yeah, we now can make radical change happen. We see that, and that's now it's just the moment.
Absolutely, regeneration rising.
Exactly. So we're already a bit over time. I don't know. Do you have like another?
I would love to hear some questions from all these wonderful. I recognize all sorts of names and friends here. So.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, with that, we would like to use like maybe 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A, and with that, I hand over to Maike.
Thank you so much. Super inspiring. These kind of meetings I could have all day. I mean, it's just really like forward, like positive. There's like really, okay, we can do this. We can build some model and just live this. Yeah. So I just love it a lot. And we've got quite a few questions. So I'm starting with one from Divya, which is, thank you so much for the inspiration. Would you say that governments and other organizations are likely to make this shift in their mindset to be more regenerative, especially after COVID-19? What is your guess, or is there a guess?
I feel that we need to, more than ever, see the people behind the organization. Because if you ask me that question just with regard to governments and the organization, then I would say no, they're kind of dinosaurs, juggernauts, oil tankers speeding ahead in one direction. They're hard to turn. But the minute you look at the individuals, the human beings in each of those organizations, and that they've also in their own personal life just gone through a traumatic experience, or some more, some others, but an experience that at the very least has shaken the foundations of what they thought could be possible in terms of change in 3 weeks or 4 weeks' time on this planet. And starting at that point, reminding people of that shake-up and engaging with the human beings in these organizations, I think has potential. And also, as I said, like I think we're just at the beginning of the systemic repercussions of this really unfolding, and most people aren't even talking about that. And I even don't want to talk about it because some of it isn't necessarily positive, but it's the more we talk about it, the more we make it real. In terms of supply lines and issues that are basically showing us how brittle the global system is, and we will see some of that falling. And we also see some political unrest. But to hold, rather than to dive into that tailspin, to really hold that and say this is a breakdown of structures that no longer serve, and let's engage with the people behind the structures in those structures and say, how do we transform these structures so you and your value, your intelligence, your experience has a new value? Because if we just say, oh, you've been in a large corporation, so you're an idiot, well, no, they're probably pretty capable of project managing and all sorts of things that could be useful if put to the right purpose. So it's a long way of saying, I'm not blue-eyed. I see what Orban is doing in Hungary, and I see what's happening in Poland, and I see how bizarre the AfD is behaving in Germany, and what huge potential for civil war there is in the US. But if we perpetuate the othering rather than engage the person and our common fate now as one species, then it's just going to continue. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we can even turn the structures of government and large corporations now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Another question came from Alexandra Pereira. Dear Daniel, I believe that your book that I'm now reading with more attention brings us an upfront vision. Is the Regenerative Cultures vision the next step regarding the SDGs evolution?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a parallel? Is there a parallel?
Well, I mean, there's wonderful, there are groups of people, since the SDGs came out, there were people working on the next iteration already, saying, okay, these aren't perfect, but let's get ready for 2030 when they create the new goals. And I know people are working on regenerative development goals, people are working on thrivability goals, and all sorts of, but ultimately I think those 70 goals are not bad at all. Apart from, of course, goal number 8, which is the Trojan horse that is continuing the dogma of the growth economy. But once we dismantle that and reframe it as qualitative rather than quantitative growth, I think we can even work with the issue of creating good work for all and qualitative growth. So again, coming back to what we said at the beginning, the SDGs for me are a bridge that are worth crossing and that we should work on. And Alexander and I have worked for Gaia Education on this set of flashcards of how to take the SDGs to the level of communities and regions and companies to really have a conversation. And the 200 questions in those cards, and I wrote those questions, and they're basically about taking people into a systemic and more regenerative way of thinking. So for me, they've always been a counter-co-opting tool of the SDGs to make them more regenerative through the process of actually applying them in place in communities with sensitivity to the local culture and the local ecosystem. So yeah, I think let's all start walking in the same direction and have the conversations about where we still differ about nuances along the way, rather than keep standing and saying, well, you're still talking sustainability, we should be talking regenerative.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Kind of close to this topic, I would maybe ask my question, because it's also a little related to this, because the SDGs were just dropped as a term, because we're also looking at SDG 14 at Ocean Now, and I was just curious when you said you worked on these cards. So if I understand, you are in touch already on a systemic level also with institutions, possibly governments, or so. I was curious whether in which way you are involved with the vision you have to convey the vision. What kind of chances do you see on a systemic level?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question, but I'll try not to end up with a long answer, because there's a lot there. Yeah, I mean, through Gaia Education and the Global Eco-Village Network, I've been linked to the UN process indirectly, never part of it, but having opportunities to, as an NGO, feed into the conversations for some time. And again, it's one of those, I see how deeply fraught the United Nations is, and at the same time, I believe we need a global forum to have the conversation of how to do this as one humanity. And we might as well work with the one we've already got and name all the inconsistencies that are there. I've also, since 2016, through the work of a wonderful woman called Rola Kauri, who runs the Cloudburst Foundation and has a close relationship with the Secretary General of the United Nations, of the Commonwealth Secretariat, which is a secretariat that holds the relationships between the 53 nations that used to be part of the British Empire, or most of them used to. Which you could say it's a strange institution, but actually it is a body that brings 2.3 billion people around the planet together around one table to say, how can we, despite our history of one of them having been the colonializers and the other ones the colonialized, how can we celebrate our common culture and our common history in a way that is moving forward from there? And since 2016, we've been trying to bring the regenerative development conversation into the Commonwealth. And it's taken a number of iterations, but it's turned into a registered charity that is called Common Earth. If you just common.earth, you'll find it. That is officially charged by the Secretary General, who only has an advisory role to these nations. It doesn't have any mandatory role, to create regenerative roadmaps for countries. And even the word roadmap is a compromise to land the language with the bureaucrats, not necessarily the favorite choice of somebody working regeneratively. But Costa Rica, not a Commonwealth country, but on the table in this conversation, has volunteered to be one of the first nations, working with Kate Rayworth and the Donut Economics Action Lab, working with the Regenerative Communities Network that was co-sponsored by the Capital Institute, John Fullerton, Stuart Cohen. There are many players in this system already. And so yeah, Costa Rica is working on a national plan to become the first regenerative country in the world, drawing on the best of current regenerative economic theory and new technologies, working on bamboo and renewables and all of that. So while those large political processes can be co-opted so quickly, there's never a guarantee. You can just keep the conversation going. You can keep trying. I think they're important, and I'm giving that some of my attention. But at the same time, also Regenerative Communities Network, there is a more like one scale down from national governments. There are people who are really beginning to wake up to the power of bioregional thinking. And so the Regenerative Communities Network brings together initiatives all over the world, and they're rapidly growing like that. Like just a decade ago, the transition towns were growing, but that was at the scale of too small to create viable systems. There are now these movements of committed people, capable people in a region saying, we're going to do our best to create an example of a regenerative community. And whether it's in the Hudson Valley north of New York, or it's in Vermont, or it's in Costa Rica, or it's in Colombia, or it's in the famous Cascadia bioregion that had been on that journey for many, many years, or on Mallorca, where I'm trying to create a kind of real-world lab for bioregional transition at the island scale. And there's already conversations with Sicily and other islands on the Mediterranean to link up. And so the problem is that with COVID-19, we don't know what the future holds. And so all those plans might just run into the sand because the future will look different. But it's definitely like it's happening. And very last, I won't go into the detail, completely different end of the spectrum. After 2 years of trying to get in the conversation of how to get the music industry involved with messaging regeneration rising, this is now beginning to move. Like I've just had meetings with the people who run Playing for Change, and we're seriously looking at how do we engage the big artists in writing the soundtrack for the regeneration rising, and how I've started to explore with people who work in culture, how do cultural institutions, museums, theaters, venues, festivals have to change to bring in and keep seeding the power that we have as culture to create culture and to create a better world for all of us if we do so with a focus on place. So yeah, lots happening.
Lots happening, so inspiring. I mean, I can see you're just totally involved in this, and probably like every one of us. I mean, I feel this way. I feel like, wow, there's so much knowledge I need to like find out, and yeah, so it's really inspiring. So I have another 1 or 2 questions. So we were just on the meta level. So if we move down a little bit, I mean, we were jumping, but now the next question from René Piske was, one question was, I second your explanation on the change from an exhaustive system to a regenerating system that sustains and heals the environment. Have you heard of the Earthship project in New Mexico? And if yes, what are your thoughts about this topic?
Wonderful. I used to when I was a long-haired hippie in a VW van in the Alpujarra in the south of Spain, trying to set up an eco-village and environmental education center in 1999. I was super into Earthships, and Mike Reynolds was my hero. And I brought the people who at the time were building the first Earthships in Europe from Santa Fe over or engaged with them while they were over here. and helped them run the first workshop in Spain. So for me, these models are wonderful because they teach a lot of living that way, but I don't think like just recently we passed the 7777777, so 7,700,000,000 und so weiter. And I don't think we're close to 8 billion of us. We're all going to end up living exactly in a Mike Reynolds type Earthship. But the type of thinking behind the Mike Reynolds type Earthship of bringing basic food production, not everything, not self-sufficiency, but cleaning your own water, generating some of your own energy, growing your salad vegetables and your diverse herbs and so on, as part of making a better indoor climate and all that into the way we design our houses is wonderful. So yeah, I like Earthships. And I won't go into off-gassing and tires and plastic and all that. Anyway.
Great, thank you. Another question came from Marion. She asks, she says, a lot of things being said are connecting in a holistic or spiritual way. How can we create more space for experiencing the connectivity and the oneness in our own responsibilities? Can we rely on ideas of governments that nations or organizations create? Or how can we practice spirituality more in our daily life?
I wouldn't leave it to the government to tell you what spirituality to follow. But no, I mean, for me, when I heard the beginning of the question, I had a strong sense that I should talk about the work of Joanna Macy. And it's actually, it's landed really well in Germany as well. I think a lot of the books have been translated. Joanna has been amazing for 40 years to, first she called it despair and empowerment work to help people deal with their feelings of what it was like. And I'm one of that generation of what it was like to live under the Cold War in Germany, where the SS-20 and the cruise missiles were pointing at Germany as the strategic battleground of the Third World War. Like we've been at the end of the world scenarios for many generations, nothing new. and Joanna back then created this work to really go deep into what our broken relationship with nature. And it's evolved, and it's now called the work that reconnects. For a while it was called deep ecology work. And it is a really powerful way of making people self-identify with their larger body, with their ecological self, and making people give voice and allow the grief and the tears to flow with what is actually happening with hundreds of species going extinct every day. And at the same time, in going into that trauma and into that grief, not to self-wallow in it, but to actually find in there the strength to become a Shambhala warrior. And like Joanna is also a Buddhist teacher, but also a system scientist. And she tells the story of the Shambhala warriors, which is an ancient Buddhist prophecy of a time where we've created technologies that are so powerful that they can lay waste to life. And that at that time, people will arise, the Shambhala warriors, which with the wisdom and the compassion, those two weapons together, would go into the corridors of power and dismantle them. And for me, that is my spiritual practice, to basically live my interbeing with my larger body and express that and feel. I remember one time Joanna saying to me, before you go onto a stage, or before you do a workshop, or before you give a speech, connect with the fact that you are 3.8 billion years of life's evolution speaking. That you have the authority of life behind you. And I think that's a spiritual practice that if all of us take that into reality, that as life, we can not only design like life, conditions conducive for life, we can also speak for our more than human brothers and sisters in the community of life. And yeah, I don't think I would wait for governments to do that. I think that has to come out each person in relationship to your people, to your friends, to your community. And it is part of the journey that we're making. But I think we can do it independent of religion. I think there are ways in each and every wisdom tradition of the world, whether you're a Sufi or agnostic in the Christian tradition, there's so many, the mystical traditions of all the world's religions are saying the same thing. In the Vedanta, the notion of seva, of being of service, is one of the central notions. And so that's, for me, it's also, it is connecting to the fact that we're coming home. We're re-harvesting all the babies that we've thrown out with the bathwater of being blinded by technology and science as the only way of knowing. It's a wonderful way of knowing, but it's not the only one. And we've actually had some pretty good ones in the past that have instructions, the original instructions of how to live in right relationships. And indigenous people hold those instructions still today. That was a bit long, sorry.
No, it's beautiful. And because now we're already on this level. I would like to maybe ask one last question that kind of goes along with that. It just came to my mind myself. What kind of, because you have so much knowledge yourself, you gain so much knowledge on this topic, and you said earlier you do SUP paddling to switch off and to relax, etc. And I was just imagining, how was it for you in your life when you gained all of this knowledge? Was it, of course, you gained it over the decades, but was there any kind of particular moment when you felt like this, very much this connection you're describing, the connection, the oneness and understanding that you connected with everything in the world? Was there a particular moment you can think of, or you can remember, where you really felt this?
Many times throughout my life. I think most of us do somehow. I mean, it's called a peak experience. It's like it can happen after you've climbed a mountain, or you had a good day on the paddleboard. But I also remember one time, like, I did this wonderful master's at Schumacher College, a very privileged place to be learning, meeting all these amazing people like James Lovelock and Rupert Sheldrake and John Todd and David Owen, could go on. And I remember really understanding the insights of complexity dynamics as the global system transforming, and how in many ways we are just like a whirlpool. We're like a whirlpool is nothing. It's neither inside nor outside. Is it air? Is it water? No, it's something in the water that you see. But I mean, that's for me, it's a good metaphor of what it's actually like to be alive in the larger flow of life. And when I first had that insight as a student at Schumacher College, it was quite a sort of trip without drugs. Basically, it was pretty intense. But interestingly, like, there is this in the journey of learning, and I think we're all apprentices and we're all pilgrims. We all should never think that we've done our learning. The learning starts every day afresh. Of course, if you've been an apprentice for 20 years, you've gain some experiences and some contacts and some references along the way, but it's really important to even be able to let go of that. So the pilgrim mind and apprentice mind is super important. And maybe I feel like I bit my tongue for long enough thinking, well, I'm just an apprentice, I better learn some more, and I spent 20 years not opening my mouth, and I really only opened it when I finally wrote Designing Regenerative Cultures in 2016. And since then, I've been doing a lot of social media work and speaking up. But sometimes I think that maybe it would have been wiser to share, because what happened is, once I started to share my book for free on social media, on my Medium blog, where you can find the whole book for free to read, I realized I was going to run out of sub-chapters to share. So I started to share my master's thesis and my PhD and some essays and some academic papers and other writings that I'd done over 20 years. And then I realized that they were meaningful to people and that I could have published them in 2006 when I wrote them. And they might have been meaningful to people. But also maybe things have moved on and some things are more meaningful to people now. But I'm telling that not to say, oh, I've been in this for a long time. I'm actually telling that to say, speak your truth as soon as you have it, because then you get feedback. Donella Meadows, one of the great visionaries of how to do this work, she says that's one of the rules of how to dance with the system. Voice your visions and your ideas, because then other people can hear it. And she was also the genius to say it's not about a paradigm shift, it's about going beyond paradigms, which I think is very important, hence iterated. Anyway.
Wow. A lot of insight. Amazing. Yeah. Yes, and thank you for that advice. We take that on board. I certainly do. Vision, live your vision, or speak it out and exchange and communicate and
see what happened to Greta Thunberg. I mean, Greta Thunberg is a perfect example.
Yes.
One woman saying, enough, I'm going crazy over the world, but I'm sensing that it's not me who is crazy, the world is crazy, and I'm going to do something about it. And suddenly millions of young people in the street following her as an example. So you all have a potential Greta Thunberg or else somebody else in you. And I think that's what we all like. Leadership isn't somebody else's job to do. It's all of our job.
Thank you. That's amazing. That's the really nice kind of thing, I think, to say in this round of Q&A at the end, because it's like this action, like, let's do it. We're all in this together. And that's also our philosophy at Ocean Now. So thank you so much. Thank you all for being patient also. I think with this said, Jacqueline, we have a really nice round of Q&A.
Yeah, so yeah, I can just agree with Michael. There's so much knowledge and just so much interesting and visionary things to learn. So yeah, once again, thank you really, Daniel, for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us. And also thank you for everyone who was participating and also asking really interesting and inspiring questions. So maybe one last question, Daniel. Is there anything you would like to tell our listeners to take away from today's talk? What is the one thing they should remember?
Ouch. Sometimes you can't change the situation you're in, but you can change the attitude you're taking to what to do about that situation. And I'm saying that to myself just as much, because it's not like, it's not all easy sailing on this side either all the time. And I think that the one, as much as a platitude as it sounds and a kind of hippie-ish statement, but it really comes down to love. And that's something you can do in every moment with the people around you, or just simply seeing the beauty of what still is. I think that's maybe the most healing effect that we can all have. Not necessarily to go get all anxious and I must save everything and it's my job and it's on my shoulders, but to simply stop and see how beautiful it is to be alive, and how just a blade of grass is magnificent. And I've just been locked inside for 40 some days. And I tell you, there's like coming home from the bins, I suddenly felt that the tree that I was standing under was downloading something into me, because I had nature deficit disorder. I had not been under a tree for so long. And if we connect back into this loving relationship that we actually draw from the beauty of life all around us all the time, it's that energy that nourishes us and then makes us do things that are aligned with that. And so as it sounds, like it all comes down to love. That's the last thing to say.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was very moving. Thank you for this, very moving closing statement.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time in these strange and wonderfully transformative times. We all wanted the big transformation to happen, and now that we're in the middle of it, it feels a little bit overwhelming at points. But hey, let's ride the waves since we're all surfers.
Okay. Yeah. Once again, thank you very much to you, Daniel, and also to our listeners. And have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay well.